Okay, we're going to get started. In order to comply with Section 2.23712D of the Code of Virginia, it is necessary for the committee to certify that since the Fairfax County School Board Comprehensive Planning Development Committee convened a closed meeting on October 17th, 2024, to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered by the committee during the closed meeting. And now we have to vote in each of the. Do I have a motion for the certification? From Dr. Anderson. Second from Ms. Dixit. All in favor? Aye. It's unanimous. Okay. So we need to redo the motions for each of the new FPAC members. I call on Ms. Dixit for a motion for Providence District.
Providence, yeah. I move the Comprehensive Planning and Development Committee endorse Priya Swamy as the Providence District Representative to the Facility Planning Advisory Council and forward this recommendation to the school board.
Second. All in favor? All opposed? And abstaining. So Ms. Dixit and Mr. Dunn in favor and Dr. Anderson opposed. The motion carries. I call on Dr. Anderson for a motion for the Springfield District Representative. Oh. Okay, Ms. Dixit.
I move that the Comprehensive Planning and Development Committee endorse Carol Chung as the Springfield District Representative to the Facilities Planning and Advisory Council and forward this recommendation to the school board.
Do I have a second? Second. All in favor? That's unanimous. The motion carries. I call on Dr. Anderson for a motion for the Moon representative. Yes.
I move that the Comprehensive Planning and Development Committee endorse Brian Utterback as the at-large representative to the Facilities Planning and Advisory Council and forward this recommendation to the school board.
Second? Second. All in favor? Dr. Anderson and Mr. Dunn. All opposed? And abstaining? Ms. Dixit. The motion carries. The minutes of the June 18th, 2024 CPDC meeting are before the committee for approval. Do I have a motion? Dr. Anderson, do I have a second? Ms. Dixit, all those in favor? It's unanimous. The motion carries. Okay, so we're now on agenda item 3.04, updates from Chair Dunn. I think most of my updates are contained in this agenda, but I will mention I had an interesting conversation recently with the Department of Energy about the availability of federal funding under Title 17 which is through the Loan Programs Office. This is a loan program that was, it's the reason Tesla is in existence today, because they provide funding under President Obama for manufacturing facilities and such. It's a loan program being used for the construction of 2 large nuclear energy plants in Georgia. And so you would think there's no relevance of this program to schools, but that would be mistaken. And I believe at the last school board meeting, Ms. Szymanski, that you, well, I asked a question about this, and I believe there was some discussion about it. I don't know, are you familiar at all with this program? So it's related because they received a huge infusion of money, hundreds of billions of dollars under the Inflation Reduction Act. But within the Loan Programs Office, there's the capacity to provide funding to schools. Again, the funding under the Inflation Reduction Act. And I've had a conversation with the Department of Energy, and they've indicated that it's either not been used or not been used much for schools, but they're very interested in having schools apply. And when I asked if there was a statutory ceiling, they said no. And when I asked how much money, there's, the largest amount of money they've approved is $9 billion for the 2 nuclear power plants, but hundreds of millions of dollars is available. And the beauty of this program is if we provide 3% of the funding, the federal government can provide 97%. And the rest is provided at below market interest rates over long periods of time. So it has a characteristic of being free money if someone's giving you 97% of the funding. And the categories of improvements are very flexible and broad. Replacing all your HVAC is obviously one thing, replacing windows, other things, solar on roofs. But it is very flexible to the extent that you might be able to, convert entire buildings to so-called green buildings, something like that. And so you're renovating an entire school to make it a green school. But for us, we're less focused on the green, more on the running of a school, basically with 97% federal dollars. So it's a pretty amazing opportunity. I'm doing additional research before I bring it back to this committee, but I do intend to bring it back. Perhaps the next meeting is my goal, because I think it would be good for CPDC to discuss it and then present it to the board. So that's my update. Ms. Herman, can you provide an update from the Facilities Planning Advisory Council? Ms. Dixit.
From what you said about DOE, do you think our latest appointee would be able to give us some insight or help us in any way in that, based on experience?
I do. I note that the latest appointee is no longer with DOE, is now independent company, but I did note that she has prior experience with Title 17, so that might be of direct relevance to helping inform discussions by FPAC about this opportunity. Any other questions or discussion? Dr. Anderson.
Thank you for raising that, and I know you shared some information electronically about this. Do we anticipate that this is an area, after staff has had some opportunity for investigation, that we can bring back to CPDC's agenda for us to discuss any further in terms of what's potentially possible?
So right now, I'm just working on my own with some folks I know, and because I used to work at DOE, so I'm doing some research just to explore the viability. Then I think bring it to the CPDC, then engage with staff. I think that's kind of the.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if Ms. Szymanski had thoughts on that.
issue with that is.
Yeah, and just to clarify, Ms. Szymanski's, so if you build solar or wind power facilities, you know, there's the production tax credit, which has made these previously non-economic power generating plants very profitable, and that's been spurring the construction over the past, you know, several years. But school districts, governments weren't able to take advantage of tax credits because they don't pay taxes. But now there's a program called direct pay, where essentially we get paid the same amount of tax credit, and it just comes from a check from the Treasury. So it's a pretty amazing opportunity, and it's 30%. So okay. Any other comments, discussion? No? Okay. Agenda item 3.05, update from FPAC.
Hi, good evening. This is Katie Herman, the chair of FPAC this year. Just want to provide a brief summary of how our year has started off. So we enjoyed a couple months off of break over summer, had a chance to recuperate after our push for completing our annual report and presenting that last June to the board during your work session. We had our first FPAC meeting in September where we received quite a bit of an update from Janice and her team. So we enjoyed getting, having quite a bit of dialogue about all the work that they were able to complete over the summer across the different building facilities. And then we discussed a few other topics related to the projects that are going to be starting off here at some point in the next year or so by staff, which is the facility condition assessment and the consultant that's now under contract for the boundary review, renovation queue, project. So we received a lot of updates on that, and we appreciate staff for keeping us in the know on how things are progressing there. We had a meeting also in October where we did not have an external speaker, and we decided after we had some time to get an update from staff again on a few projects, we took some time to talk through the potential updates or revisions to the FPAC charter, which is the next item on the agenda for tonight. So we'll tackle that item here in a few minutes. And we are planning for our next FPAC meeting, which is November 12th. And I did receive email confirmation that a staff member from the Fairfax County Department of Public Works and Environmental Services will be joining us to discuss their P3 implementation program. So we're really excited about that. I believe she's going to be joining us virtually, but so I am working with some some FPAC members to prep for that meeting. I'm sorry, go ahead.
In November?
Yes, November 12th is the FPAC meeting date. So if anyone wants to come and hear what the county is able to share with us, lessons learned, best practices, hear more about some of the projects that they've done with P3s, that's the angle we're hoping to take at that meeting. And that's pretty much the update I have at this point. So if there are any questions.
Dr. Anderson?
Just one. So after this evening's recommendations, if they were to be approved by the full board, FPAC will be fully staffed for the first time in quite a while. Is
There's
that correct?
a vacancy for Franconia District.
Oh, that is certain? Okay, I did not,
Yes.
okay, thank you. And we tried.
And there might be a vacancy for Braddock District. Okay, updates from staff, Ms. Zemanski?
Sure. It is.
I know, we're in the room and now we're super formal.
And it looks like I'll be giving some other updates per the agenda below, but not included on this list, I wanted to bring to the attention of CBDC two items. One is a quick update on policy 8240. That's our construction procurement board policy. Wanted to let you know that myself and other colleagues amongst staff, we've been doing some red lines to that policy to allow for the CM at risk and the design build procurement methods be permissible to use at FCPS. So we finished those markups. We got outside legal counsel and everyone to review it. And it's with Dr. Reed now. So just, again, I know that was brought up in the last CBDC meeting and in an FPAC meeting, and we just went through and took the opportunity to go through the whole policy and make some staff recommended changes. So that's all I have on that.
What, will that come to CPDC to be presented?
I submitted it to Dr. Reed, which is usually staff's protocol. Now, I believe normally what would happen is that goes through the governance committee, but again, that might be something you would want to discuss with your colleagues. But from staff side, we've finished our first pass. So there was that, which is great. And the other one I just wanted to bring to the board's attention for just some general feedback is a reminder that as part of the CIP back in February approval, there were a couple amendments, and that was to do scoping for the boundary adjustment specific to park lawn and specific to Coates. I just want to bring that out there and get some board feedback, because I think since that amendment was made and passed, there's been some developments more from the countywide. And so, you know, our staff, we submitted to the board clerks over the summer some possible dates for park lawn and Coates, but it's looking like with the timing of the school board policy getting now revised that we have to work under, and then bringing on through consulting and doing that countywide work, the engagement for the park lawn and Coates work is going to like 100% overlap with the countywide work. And, you know, we just wanted to bring that up for discussion. We want to make sure we're keeping everything really clean and clear with the community, that, you know, now that that work is advancing, we just want to be really mindful of that, since we did get a directive to do 2 individual adjustments there.
Can I ask a quick question, and then I'm sure Dr. Anderson will have some thoughts. Wasn't there also a boundary study, and Dr. Anderson can correct me if I'm wrong, but about Glasgow? There was a Glasgow study that I thought was also approved. It was initially not approved, and then I thought it was approved subsequently.
I mean,
I can answer that.
yeah.
Go ahead. Yes, Dr. Anderson.
It wasn't the study in the same way that it was articulated with Coates and Park Lawn. Rather, it was to prioritize it in the through consulting engagement process, so it could be first in line and hopefully first to have impact. That's what occurred there. I did have a couple of questions. I don't know if you had more. The first thing regarding policy 8240, one of the things that I wanted to state, typically, the policies do go through governance. So while I think it might be interesting for this committee to review it, it will have to still circle back on into governance. And both of us serve on the governance committee, Ms. Dixon and myself, and I know right now we're knee-deep in the grading policy. And is it on the list currently that was provided to Ms. Slady as a policy to be expedited, or does it need to be expedited and prioritized in any way? It's just more of a wondering. You don't necessarily have to answer it for this group, but I just know that docket is fairly full.
Yep, understood, and I don't believe it is. And I just wanted to be transparent since it was asked in a previous meeting, just to make sure you guys knew where we were with it. And understanding, yes, like, agreed, we follow the policy, we follow the procedure of routing everything through Dr. Reed, and then she takes it to governance.
Okay, and my secondary questions and comments regarding the Coates and Park Lawn, I know both of those schools are they're in bad shape. And I'm not sure if adding more trailers is a solution that is going to resolve the issues that are going on at those two schools. And I can only speak more intimately regarding Park Lawn because I drive past it every single day, and it's a sea of trailers. And there's not one day that I run across a staff member or a parent of that school that they're not asking, when is the relief coming? I appreciate the difficult spot that we're in because now the through consulting timetable has now coincided with what you all were trying to do, because I know we also received multiple dates from someone in communication, and every time we said yes to those dates, we heard nothing again. And me, as the magisterial member, rather, we would say yes to those dates, then we heard nothing, and then in a few weeks, we'd get another set of dates. I was very concerned when now we're on probably our third, or if not even fourth set of dates. We didn't have to be in that position. Having said that, it might be awkward, but I think it is worthwhile to have this initial conversation with the community, maybe even setting up what will happen, because this is expected to be a Park Lawn-specific discussion, while through consulting is expected to be a justice pyramid discussion, which will have a larger group of people who are going to be in attendance, from Glasgow to Justice to Park Lawn and all of the others in the pyramid. I believe Justice has 7 elementary schools in the pyramid. And so if we could carve out a space, which this would do, to just talk to the Park Lawn community about Park Lawn, I think that would be appreciated.
You see a world where we could use this as an opportunity to get the Park Lawn specific feedback and then somehow fold it in and make sure it's coinciding with the greater project?
I think that's possible. The only thing that I see, and I actually, the more that I'm thinking about this, because you mentioned to me just a few minutes ago, and I've been thinking about it, I see it as a real benefit to just really hone in on this very significant issue at Park Lawn. It's a sea of trailers, and taking the information that is gleaned from that discussion and bringing it up to the justice pyramid discussion, I think it's almost inevitable. But again, I'm not even sure of that timetable specifically. So I'm not as worried about it currently because we're talking about a subset of a larger group with these two discussions.
Can I ask, just for my clarification, Dr. Anderson, just boiling it down, are you, it sounds like you're opposed to bringing the Park Lawn and Coates boundary revisions within the scope of the countywide, is that correct?
I'm not opposed to anything because right now, all we're talking about is the community discussions. There's really nothing to oppose. It's just making sense of decisions that have been made. I was of the position then, and I continue to be of the position now, that I don't think there was full understanding of what some of the implications of decisions that were made earlier in this year regarding Park Lawn, regarding Coates, regarding Glasgow. It always boggled my mind, and I know we had this discussion, Ms. Dixit, probably several months later, that Glasgow, that was on step 2, because step 1 had already been approved, was not approved by the board, and yet the board went and approved step 1 for Park Lawn and Coates. I just didn't understand that at all, and I think maybe, the board had just convened, and maybe there was a lack of understanding of the process that as it existed then. But that's my long-winded way of telling you that I'm not opposing of anything. I just don't think there are necessarily conflicts as I originally was thinking about it when we were just chatting here. I think we can get some real benefits by having these two conversations, and they don't necessarily have to be in conflict with each other. But it's hard to say until we hear what the information, what the meeting will yield.
If I may ask, Ms. Szymanski, but maybe Dr. Anderson, is that, so that the timeline for Coates and Park Lawn, I'm assuming, there'll be high school pyramid meetings, 24 of them, apparently, according to the presentation from, through consulting, on the countywide. And for Parks and Coates, there would have to be school-based conversations. So it'd be like two focused conversations amidst the broader countywide. Right now, the schedule for the countywide calls for high school pyramid meetings before any changes are proposed from November to March. Do you know when the community conversations for Coates and Park Lawn would roughly be scheduled? It would be within that timeframe?
Yeah, I'm actually trying to pull up the actual amendment language, but I believe the amendment language wasn't so much tying the actual boundary adjustment to a date, but rather it was having community scoping conversations, and I believe it was listed as fall and spring of 24, 25. So it just kind of talked about a rough range, which is what we're in now and will be through spring.
And just for your edification, one of the initial dates, when I said the date just kept moving, and I'm unsure as to why, essentially, one of the initial conversations was scheduled for late August, and then it was moved to September, and then late October, and now we're in November. And I'm fully unclear as to why the initial dates that were provided were no longer viable, but that's just where we are.
Oh, sorry, I apologize. I didn't see you.
So when the board voted for the Coates and Park Lawn and then, and Glasgow, I, with some other board members, I voted against both of them because we knew that we were going to do this comprehensive boundary study. And now we already have approved that. There's a plan in place, consultant has been hired. If we cannot, instead of duplicating the effort, if we can somehow figure this out with the use of that consultant, they can first maybe address that area and the schools particularly, and maybe then school can take some of the information. I don't know if that's possible. I'm just throwing out there because it looks like they're going to do this boundary-wide, county-wide, and then we're going to do one separately. So I don't know if that's extra resources needed there. So, but I just want to say I was consistent. The reason of my vote against it was because we knew we were going to do this county-wide boundary change. So thank you.
If it's helpful, I did pull up the language, if you think.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And there's two of them. They're exactly the same. One's Park Lawn, one's Coates. So I'll just read one. I move to amend the CIP to add Coates to Table 4, priority recommended boundary adjustments on page 39 of the proposed CIP with a potential scoping of fall/spring 2024. This will allow staff to address the current and projected capacity deficit, student membership growth at the school, and the number of temporary classrooms at the school.
So you read that a little quickly, and I'm a visual person. I didn't hear community meetings in there. It's just,
Yeah, it says potential scoping in fall and spring 2024, and under, at least the old policy was the scoping equates to going out to the community and getting feedback on what a scope should look like. Hey, how many other schools around it should we look at? What are the things we need to consider when developing a scope of what the extent of that sandbox is going to be when we inevitably develop scenarios?
so under the old policy, and didn't school boundary revisions take multiple years? Is that true, not true?
I think it was left at the school board's discretion, and that's, Yeah.
It really would be in response to what was being provided to the community and how accepting they were of it and how many changes and revisions needed to be done. There was a change to Kent Gardens that occurred in 6 months. There was a change to, is it the Langley McLean? That took a little bit over a year since I've been on the board.
Okay.
When we did Glen Forest, that started before I got on the board and was completed in my first year, so that took roughly a year and a half.
Is it staff's understanding that the changes for Parkland and Coates would be implemented at the same time as the countywide revisions?
I mean, we had an initial conversation with, I'm sorry, can you repeat that again?
So if the boundary, since we're changing, we're going for countywide process, looking at all boundaries, then that's planned to be implemented fall of 2026. Would any boundary changes for Coates and Parkland likely be implemented in the same timeframe?
I think that's possible. I think then that's really a question of could we do it any sooner possibly if we did it on its own? And, you know, given the timing of that, that's why I just wanted to bring it up for conversation. I think if we do go out, I want to have the support and be very clear on the messaging too, right? Right now, we've been going out and saying, we're not doing any scenario building until we've had robust community engagement for the countywide, and which is true. But this is kind of following a different track right now, and I wouldn't want to create any confusion with mixed messaging, saying, well, maybe we would change it at Coates or something like that. I just want to be very intentional about, you know, how we would go out to those communities, given what's going on at a countywide scale, if that makes sense.
Well, if the motion says 24, 25, couldn't you align those community discussions along the same time frame that's anticipated for the countywide, so that you do pre-boundary change discussions, November through March, scenarios, March to May, and, you know, June to September is, you know, scenario one.
Yes.
And June is still within the, or you could do it May, you could start a
Yep.
little month earlier.
Yes.
So that would avoid disruptive messaging or disruption in the message, possibly. I don't know if Dr. Anderson has thoughts on that. Okay.
Okay. I think those were my 2 items.
Okay. The next agenda item is 3.07, the FPAC charter. I call on Ms. Herman.
Alrighty, everyone, I'm gonna kind of ask that we take a high-level approach to this. And let me give a little bit of background. So as you know, FPAC has a charter that formed FPAC back in 2009, 2010, and the charter has been amended maybe 1 or 2 times. FPAC, just as an FYI, also has bylaws that we follow as a entity. And we've, as a public body, we've had a few conversations about whether or not it's time to dust off our charter to see if there are ways that we can clarify some information, take a look at the things that we are being asked by the school board to advise the school board on. Again, just as, you know, a public body, we all think it's smart to take a look at our charter and our mission every couple years to make sure that it aligns with what the school board is requesting of us. The last time the FPAC charter was amended was in February 2015. So it's been almost 10 years since it's been looked at for its accuracy of what the school board's requesting. So the school board clerk sent out a red line version, and I will preempt this, that this is just a first draft, But during FPAC's October meeting, what we did as a group is we talked through some potential edits, which are marked up here as red line. Again, as a draft, and based on however much time you all want to spend looking at this tonight, we could also potentially, I'll just throw this out there, come back together during the next CPDC meeting, which I think is November 7th, and talk through this some more if you all would like to have more time to digest some potential edits. But as a very quick summary of some of the proposed edits, there's some editorial changes that we might just need some updates, requests from staff to make sure that we're referencing policies correctly. There was some consensus among FPAC members during our October meeting to remove the background section just for really tightening up the language. There is a discussion at the top of page 3 regarding the matters that the school board may be wanting to have FPAC focus on in the future. So there was currently we have a list of 6 things, but as you all can likely appreciate, we may be better suited to provide you all advice and recommendations on a slightly different list of topics. And let's see here. Beyond that, we really didn't have much else except for the one other thing on the last section in the work products, the last page. There was a discussion that maybe there's an opportunity for FPAC to be a little bit more nimble in the delivery of some of our recommended research and findings and use a different method of communicating that throughout our year, which would be an issuance of, I don't know, it could be 4 or 6 memorandums to the school board rather than taking a year to do all of our research and recommendations and putting it into one lengthy report, which is currently our process, that we could break that effort up and send memoranda to the board every couple months as we kind of look at a topic that's current to the school board and be able to provide recommendations and feedback on a more expedited process. We could still create an annual report at the end of our year where it is a compilation of our engagement with the community, the status of our membership, our meeting summaries, as well as the memoranda that we do create. So that would be, like our annual report would kind of be like bringing it all together at the end of the year. But again, these are just our ideas. FPAC is here to collect feedback from the school board, whether it's tonight or over the course of the upcoming weeks, to make sure that we are providing you all what you're looking for.
Dr. Anderson?
Thank you for that presentation. And it's interesting that we're reviewing the charter because we actually had raised that. I think Mr. Dunn did, and I believe I did as well, during a conversation regarding the boundary work to really determine what is FPAC's role. So this is kind of timely in order to identify that a little bit more clearly. One of the things that I wanted to raise, that I don't know if this is here, I'm glancing at this really quickly. I believe FPAC is one of the committees that has a specific, there's some specific state regulation that governs it. Title I, FPAC, and ACSD, those advisory committees are a little bit more closely monitored. Is this your understanding?
I'm not aware of that, but we could I might have to ask staff to see if they have any
Yeah.
knowledge
know
of that, but.
Yeah, so Dr. Anderson, FPAC is one of the school board authorized advisory committees. It's not one of the state or
Okay.
legally required ones.
Okay, well, thank you. Also, what was previous practice was that FPAC would provide a mid-year presentation. Is that somewhere in here?
We had been providing a mid-year report, which was a summary of the first 4 months of our year. That is something that we struck out of this red line version because we felt like if we communicated with input, obviously, from the board of the items we would be creating memoranda for, that would be delivering products to the board on a regular basis that would provide that feedback. But obviously, we're open to providing what you all are looking for.
I know last year you were able to provide a couple of those memorandums, and that was very helpful because it was timely and it was responsive to an issue that was before us. And so I'm all in favor of using that as an opportunity to be more responsive and to be more nimble in how you guide, how you provide guidance to the school board. The background information, just kind of now digging into this a little bit. I don't know if I have an issue with removing the background information, but I would like it to live somewhere because it's just interesting and good to have as we have turnover on FPAC and on the board and with staff. It just helps to provide some context. I would hate for it to completely disappear because with so many other things, we're always trying to figure out, how did this come to be? And it's just listed here. Can you speak a little bit to the changes at the top of page 3, I believe, regarding the 7 items that now the committee is recommending to be under the purview of FPAC? If you can just highlight what is being removed and any new activities that are being introduced.
So when FPAC talked about these red line edits during our October meeting, we talked about how items A through C that are shown there are really captured by the CIP. And from our perspective, again, I don't want to speak for everyone on FPAC, but I think generally the perspective is that the CIP that's produced by FCPS is extremely robust at this point with information and metrics and data to support items A through C. That may not have been the case when FPAC was new or had just formed. One of their, I think, initial roles was to help advise the school board on how to create a more robust CIP. So that's been done, which is great. So I think we feel that we haven't been spending much time in the past, at least since I've been on FPAC, looking at items A through C because we haven't been asked by the school board to really pay that much attention to the data that goes into these things. Now, school capacity, sure, we participate in conversations about that related to potential building design, and we kind of touch on that during our long-range design recommendations for the future focus of how K through 12 public school buildings could be designed to help facilitate the next phase of education. But we really felt like that wasn't one of the core things that we had been looking at over the past however many years. School closures and new schools, I think that's something that FPAC would continue to work on, which is item D, but now kind of falls within, number 3 and number 6. So some of these things are kind of reformatted into a different phrased bullet to allow us a little bit more direction while being flexible. Student accommodation planning, which is E, now falls within a couple of the other newer items that are listed there, just phrased differently. So And then if you look at items 1 through 7, that's more of a focus on the actual, what we all think is the functional facility or the school campus. We are still able to help give recommendations or advice to the school board on things like the utilization of school facilities or renovations, but it's less tied to the CIP development and more tied to the planning that goes into the school facilities, either design or construction or renovation, if that makes sense.
It does. The only, I think, point I'd like to make in this section, and thank you for trying to align the lettering with the numbering, while I think the construction or opening up new schools is really captured in number 6, I don't think I see the same clarity with closures. Not that we are in that space, but we're planning for all potential activities. I don't know if I see, if by reading numbers 1 through 7, I see that FPAC could potentially have a role in that kind of work. And I'd like for you to be able to provide a wider scope rather than a narrower scope, or a more specific scope rather than a high level, which can be misconstrued, and you potentially are not available for what could be a substantive activity. The only other question that I had was regarding the charge, and now I'm losing the page that was on. The charge, which I think crossed out, that the board will provide FPAC with a charge, and it says something else. I can't find the page. I don't remember. I'm just curious about those changes. And I'll stop here, and I'll try to find the page to bring to your attention during somebody else's turn.
Dixit, do you have any? Ms. Dixit?
Thank you, Mr. Dunn. Actually, the question is for you, sorry. I wanted to ask about, I understand the background is gone, it's maybe not relevant anymore, but for just somebody who's new to the, what FPAC is, there is no background, it goes straight to issue. So I want to know if we can add some sort of introduction about what this, group does, FPSC. Especially for people who are new to FCPS or who are new to this kind of like committee and what type of work we do. That's one of my feedback. I also wanted to point to that page 3, where we have the 7 items listed, which are great because they all are very relevant to the work FPAC should be doing. I did want to ask, where is the energy efficiency, under which section? Can we add a word term to it, or is it already included in one of the places when you're writing school facility improvement, maintenance, and operation? Just kind of looking into the energy efficiency model, how we can improve that.
Sure. Yeah, we can find a way to include that or further explain where that would fall.
Okay, and also I see that at the bottom it says that district-wide instruction and programming policies for IBAP program grade level configuration. Why is it not as Yes, right under the, point number 7, I didn't understand. Is this the impact of the program? Is that what it means? Okay. All right. And the last thing I would say is, again, a more robust work products. Right now, it's kind of very generic in nature, even though in the before it was like 6, 7 items listed, but now it's just like 3 lines, and maybe we can, just like Dr. Anderson said, just give a little bit more of details there that how the work will be provided to school board. And under number 7, process and function, I know we are calling it community advisory committees now. We have changed that use from citizen. I don't know if that's, everybody's using that all across. Advisory, standing
What page are
committee.
you on?
On the, I don't know, the page number's not there, for page 4, on number 7, process and function. The FPAC will operate as standing citizen advisory committee to a school board. I think we're using community instead of citizens.
That's a good catch.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Can I maybe get a response to the charge? This is under sections that said issues for the FPAC consideration for. The first paragraph, it's been removed, that the board will annually develop a charge. Can you speak to that a little bit, please? Because that's the board's work with every advisory committee. They might develop a charge that has been recommended by the committee, but it is still the board's work to distribute.
I think that was one of my recommended edits. So I think in recent years, and Ms. Herman can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think the board has provided a charge to FPAC. Is that right, Ms. Herman? So I think the intention was, given the revisions to the strategic governance manual, that already speaks to the process of providing charges or not providing charges. Doesn't need to be in the FPAC charter, since that will just be a standard process across all community advisory committees, to the extent that that is required. But I think part of the edits more globally is instead of having mid-year and end-of-year reports, because facilities has moved from, let's say, the back burner of FCPS and school board priorities to the front burner, given all of the issues happening with boundaries, 42-year renovation queues, public-private partnerships, and so on. The anticipation is that this charter revision is intended to provide a more flexible and responsive continuing conversation throughout the school year between FPAC and the school board, so that memos can be provided not just at 6-month intervals, but on an as-needed basis on topics that arise that may not be anticipated at the beginning of the year. So it's intended to, enable more of a think tank, consultative process rather than only kind of multi-year issues that, can be dealt with in a more bureaucratic way.
Sure, and thank you for that clarification, but I think you could also make the argument that there are a lot of other parts of this that could be assumed by the operating manual, even the membership that is in section 5. It's a matter of where do we slice and dice this to embed it into the operating manual, which does speak to membership. I'm not sure, I know that every one of the advisory committees have bylaws, but I'm not sure how many of them have a charter document that is revised and reviewed. So I personally like kind of the one-stop shop for FPAC, which would include how the charge is developed and the membership. I would not necessarily want to assume everything therein into the operating manual. And if you start with the charge, there's a lot of places here where I think it is duplicative. We just want to make sure it's in alignment, but I like just kind of picking this up, particularly because FPAC is such a different advisory committee as new members are oriented to the committee. This is what they'll be reviewing to just really help to center how they enter the work of FPAC and not necessarily the operating manual, because we know FPAC kind of sits over here a little bit. Yeah. And one last thing, one of the things that I also noticed under the section where A through F became 1 through 7, is the reference to FPAC's role in boundaries is no longer present. Can you speak to that a little bit, please?
We talked about that in our October meeting, and while boundaries really are not something that FPAC seems to have a strong role in moving forward, because there's the newly formed boundary committee, it's not, we're unclear what our role would be moving forward with boundaries, other than to provide thoughts on how the impacts of school boundaries could impact our facilities and the planning for our facilities. I think in the past, we had been occasionally requested to provide feedback on certain boundary topics. That hasn't happened for, I think, quite a few years. And so it sounds like that the topic of boundaries has a different potential path forward, and that it would be part of any conversations regarding long-term planning of facilities, whether it's one particular facility or a couple facilities within a region or a pyramid, but that it may not be our role anymore to have an advisory task associated with boundaries, if that makes sense.
I appreciate what you're saying, and I think I do disagree to some extent, because I think we're conflating two different sets of committees and their roles. The committee that is being convened is the Superintendent's Advisory Committee to give information to the superintendent. The board advisory committees are to speak directly to the board. They're distinctively two different functions. And so I would not want to not have my representative on the board be able to speak to me about something as important to the community, such as boundaries. I don't know how to articulate in this moment what that could look like, but I think it needs to be in the conversation, because you are here to guide the board, not the staff. Advisory committees tell us different things, and we turn around and we say, staff, we want these things, or we don't want these things from what is being advised to us.
May I suggest, given the hour, that we provide written input to Ms. Herman through email or otherwise, and then maybe the next CPDC meeting, revised draft could be reviewed by CPDC. And I'm sensitive to Ms. Szymanski not being made to wait longer, but the next couple items are for Ms. Szymanski to speak to. So any objection to moving on to the next agenda item? No. Okay. 9. So as within the time constraints, Ms. Szymanski, can you address, provide CPDC with the status of providing, or just an overview of the responses to the Facilities Condition Assessment RFI, and perhaps sharing such responses with FPAC and the school board?
Sure, I can keep it high level. One of the things I did last week was put a little update in the board Friday letter, so if you had a chance to read that. Because we took some of the RFI responses, we took a look at our existing budget and kind of just came up with a strategy that would allow us to break out the project into phases, knowing that what's unique about this facility condition assessment is that it needs to first and foremost inform a renovation queue. So we did kind of structure the phasing of it over that. So saying, hey, if we have about a quarter of the funding currently, we could actually go out and do a broad overview with that funding to the fullest extent possible. Then that could be information that we prioritize and inform the renovation queue. And then as funding becomes available, and it actually might even help us, allocate money more strategically to go back and do a more robust, in-depth look over the following years after that. And we could break it up by getting information from that overview. Say the overview says, hey, these 40 schools are in the worst shape, then we'd say, great. In the following years, when we break out that phased work and do a more in-depth study, maybe we would do those first 40 first, if we were to say do a third, and a third of the portfolio. So that was sort of the rationale behind it. And I think it kind of followed along with some of the RFI responses. They said, hey, you could phase this over multiple years. We also got feedback saying, hey, it's interesting you folded this in with the renovation queue in a good way, because you could build that framework concurrently and say, hey, the framework really wants to look at accessibility and sustainability, whatever it might be, and then that could inform the overview priority data you get up front.
Interesting.
They also recommended to leverage as much in-house data as you have to be cost effective, so we've been working behind the scenes to really kind of collect and compile that. I know in one of our CIP follow-on responses, we kind of gave you all an overview of what we track and what we don't track, and I do think we truly do track a lot of good information that can supplement this work. So really just trying to leverage that to be more effective. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. We're using that approach to develop the scope of work accordingly. And so our idea is that an RFP would go out more for those task 1 and task 2 together, which is the overview and the queue framework and formation. And then we could do separately or as a change order the breakout phases afterwards as funding becomes available.
Any questions? Can you also, so agenda item 3.09, can you please provide an update on the public-private partnership work that you're doing for January?
Sure. So yeah, as you mentioned, we have a P3 cost-benefit analysis and legal framework due to the board in January as part of Executive Limitation 11. So we're currently working through that. Because it's a little bit of new work for us and more technical now than just that overview we provided in the CIP follow-on, we're getting a little bit of help from a consultant. So we have them on board. We've been doing site walks with them of facilities so that they can actually put together a real cost-benefit analysis. And from the legal standpoint, it's not so much our team, but we've been working collaboratively with our general counsel so that they can kind of take that PPEA that was passed in 2002 to allow for Fairfax County to do public-private partnerships with schools and kind of developing an FCPS framework for that. So, things are moving.
Awesome. And finally, can you share any update on collaboration with the county to expedite the permitting of FCPS facilities?
Sure, and I think we talked about that a lot in FPAC, and I'm actually really curious to hear what some of the FPAC representatives have in terms of ways that we can expedite our permitting process here. It does take a while, and there's a big financial and time impact to all of that. I do say we got through a lot of the permitting hurdles on the stadium restroom project, which was, a challenge for a while. I think prior to coming on, they didn't really want to look at it in terms of like a one-size-fits-all master file, even though we were using a prefabricated unit. We got new leadership on our side, on their side, able to work it out and got them to yes on that, got them to have a consistent reviewer. So, I think we just went out to bid and awarded. So we're working through a schedule with that vendor. The outdoor classrooms, that one still continues to be a bit of a challenge. We got to yes on about half of the 37. I think you guys saw the contract that just went out and got approved, and we still have another 14 or 15 in with the county for approval at this point.
Any questions? No? Okay, well, with that then, would someone like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting? Or, oh, okay, we're just adjourning. We're closed. Thank you for your time. No, perfect.